So what kind of courage does it take to stand up to the cancel culture and to protect our children, to protect your children from this culture? Now, this Father's Day, I want to honor two dads who stepped up to the challenge, and both have suffered for what they did. Both have been showered with hate speech. One lost his job, but neither regret the steps they took, because thousands of other parents have been moved and challenged and inspired by these dads and their example. So let me focus on how they did what they did. Their courage was marked by intellectual precision and moral clarity. That's what I really respect about how they did this. They wrote two letters. They're not angry letters. They're very carefully worded, very carefully edited letters that they released, and both of them have gone viral. And I want to show you why. I want to quote from them because their words illustrate calm and forceful yet courageous leadership. These two dads were able to put resistance into words, the same kind of resistance that you're feeling like you want to do, and but how do we do it? How do we say it? Well, these dads give us a good example of how it can sound. They are standing purposefully against the woke culture. Now, the first dad, Andrew Gutman, was sending his 12-year-old daughter to a private school in New York. The tuition for the school is roughly $54,000 per year. Let me say that again. $54,000 per year. And of course, for that kind of money, he was expecting the school to teach high-level academic excellence and intellectual bravery and courageousness. And of course, the school actually did promise those things. Let me say them again. High-level academic excellence, intellectual bravery, and courageousness. And so when the school fell headlong into cowardice and academic dishonesty and political correctness, Mr. Gutman wrote this letter to the other 600 families in the school explaining why he's pulling his daughter out. And then he was urging them to pressure the school to start doing what was right, or else to follow his example and pull their children out. Now, this is leadership, and it's good leadership. Let's look at his letter briefly. I won't read the whole thing. I'm going to read a little bit. Now, in the notes below, you'll be able to see a link to both these letters so you can see both of them in full. But let me just point out some of the highlights of both. Here's the one from Mr. Gutman. He said, "We no longer believe," he and his wife, "we no longer believe that Brearley's administration and board of trustees have any of our children's best interests at heart. And moreover, we no longer have confidence that our daughter will receive the quality of education necessary to further her development into a critically thinking, responsible, enlightened, and civic-minded adult." That's why they wanted her to go to this school. That's what they expected her to be getting. "I write to you, you fellow parents," he's saying, "to share our reasons for leaving the Brearley community. But I also urge you to act." Now, this is leadership. He's giving them a charge. "I urge you to act. And this is what your leadership in your community needs to be. You need to be able to articulate instruction and direction that you're giving to them, but then set that example so you can say, do what I'm doing. Don't do just what I'm saying, but do what I'm doing with me. I urge you to act before the damage to the school, to its community, and to your own child's education is irreparable," he says. He's leading the way forward. He's leading the way out of this institution, which has betrayed them. Financially and academically, yes. "It cannot be stated strongly enough," he says, "that Brearley's obsession with race must stop. It should be abundantly clear to any thinking parent that Brearley has completely lost its way, not a little bit, and he's choosing his words carefully, has completely lost its way. The administration and the board of trustees have displayed a cowardly and appalling lack of leadership by appeasing." Okay, do you get this? He's stating the case by appeasing an anti-intellectual, illiberal mob and then allowing the school to be captured by that same mob. And that's what's happened. It happens to every teacher's college, every university, every public school in America has been captured by the same ideology. And both political parties. And here's a quick note to YouTube. Look, this is not a partisan video, and this is not a partisan letter that Mr. Gutman wrote. Keep listening. He says, "I object to the view," and this is he goes through the letter. "I object." And if you want to know all of his objections, click on the link below and read what he said. I'm just giving you a little taste of it. "I object," he says, "to the view that I should be judged by the color of my skin, and I cannot tolerate a school that not only judges my daughter by the color of her skin, but encourages and instructs her to prejudge others by theirs, by the color of their skin. I object to the charge of systemic racism in this country and at our school. And then he defines what it really is, and he says we don't have it here. We have not had systemic racism against blacks in this country since the civil rights reforms of the 1960s, a period of more than 50 years. Now, I'm a little bit older than Mr. Gutman, and I can tell you that he's right about this. I've seen that movement, I've seen what's happened, I've seen the fruit of it, and he is correct. To state otherwise is a flat-out misrepresentation of our country's history and adds no understanding to any of today's societal issues. It goes on to say, I object to the idea that blacks are unable to succeed in this country without aid from government or from whites. And I've done a video on this that you can see here on this channel called The Hard Bigotry of Low Expectations, where I get into this and talk about this. This is a kind of racism that he's describing, that it is being taught in their school. By adopting critical race theory, he says, this school is advocating the abhorrent viewpoint that blacks should never be that blacks should forever be regarded as helpless victims and are incapable of success regardless of their skills and talents and hard work. What Brearley is teaching our children is precisely the true and correct definition of racism. Right. Okay, going on, he says, I object to mandatory anti-racism training for parents. So what they're doing, not only teaching the children these things, calling it anti-racism, making it sound righteous or self-righteous, it's really just the opposite. And he says these sessions that parents are required to go to in the evenings and on Saturdays, he says, in both their content and delivery are so sophomoric and simplistic and so unsophisticated and inane that I would be embarrassed if they were taught to Brearley kindergartners. And in fact, this is, as I think back on my school experience, so much of what we were taught by the teachers who went through the teachers' colleges were so inane. Everything from the field trips to what we had in the classrooms were so simplistic and sophomoric. Yeah, I mean, even for second, third, fourth, fifth graders, it was way below the ability of those students to understand and comprehend, and really exasperated us, my co-students and I. He says, I object to Brearley's vacuous, inappropriate, and fanatical use of such words as equity, diversity, and inclusiveness. I object, he goes on to say, to Brearley's advocacy for groups and movements such as Black Lives Matter, a Marxist, anti-family, heterophobic, anti-Asian, and anti-Semitic organization that neither speaks for the majority of the black community in this country, nor in any way, shape, or form represents their best interests. And he's right about this. And again, he's not just relying on rumor. He's gone to their website to see what they write, to see what they stand for, to see what they've published. And this is, in fact, what they're saying. I object to the gutting of the history, civics, and classical literature curriculums. I object to the censorship of books that have been taught for generations because they contain dated language potentially offensive to the thin-skinned and hypersensitive class. And he said this has already come up in his daughter's fourth grade class. I object to the lowering of standards for the admission of students and for the hiring of teachers. I object to the erosion of rigor in classroom work and homework and the escalation of grade inflation. So here's what he's saying. Education is being ruined right before their eyes. And this is systematic, what's happening. We have today in our country from both political parties and at all levels. Now, let me just say something he's not saying. When he's talking about systemic racism, he says that does not exist. He's not denying the existence of racism in little pockets, which certainly does exist. And there may even be comments to this video below from people I don't even know who reflect attitudes of racism, which I don't condone, and neither would he condone. But these are small little pockets. It's not systemic. It's restricted. And lastly, he says, I object with as strong a sentiment as possible that Brearley has begun to teach what to think instead of how to think. I object that the school is now fostering an environment where our daughters and our daughters' teachers are afraid to speak their minds in class for fear of consequences, that they would be getting in trouble. I object that Brearley is trying to usurp the role of parents in teaching morality and bullying parents to adopt that false morality at home. I object that Brearley is fostering a divisive community where families of different races, which until recently were part of the same community, are now segregated into two, the oppressors and the oppressed. These are the reasons why we can no longer send our daughter to Brearley. He states it clearly, he states it dispassionately, but firmly and forcefully. Given the insidious cancel culture that has of late permeated our society, most parents are too afraid to speak up about all this. Now, remember, this is the letter to parents. He's writing to parents. And then he says, but speak up you must. Even if you're afraid, you have to begin speaking up. There is strength in numbers, and he says, I assure you the numbers are there. And he knows this because he's been talking to the parents in the school, so many of whom agree with him and share his same sentiments, but they're too afraid to speak up. And this is why he says, somebody's got to speak up. I'm going to speak up. Somebody has to take the lead in pulling their daughter out of the school. I'm going to take the lead in doing that because it is the right thing. I cannot leave my daughter in the school. This is what he's saying. And certainly, and he has done this. He's not just complained. He's taken action. And he's taken very serious action. And of course, he wasn't planning to do this. He wanted his daughter to be able to go through the school, have these friends, move through the entire curriculum, and be benefited from it. He didn't expect this interruption, but he's doing it because it is the right thing to do. He says to the parents, if changes are not forthcoming, then demand new leadership. And if that's not forthcoming, then follow my lead and take your children out of the school. Silence is no longer an option. Respectfully, Andrew Gutman. And that's, again, if you want to see the whole thing, go to the link below. The next hero in the story, the other letter, was written by a math teacher in New York who was fired for writing the letter. And again, his letter is long, and it's also very thoughtful. And it documents what he was going through in a way that I can't possibly do justice to here in this video. I'm just going to read a few lines from his letter so you get the taste of it. He said, I refuse to stand by while my students are indoctrinated. And he said that the children at his school were afraid to challenge the repressive ideology that ruled the school, so he spoke up on their behalf. Here's some of his lines. Anti-racist training, he said, sounds righteous, but it is the opposite of truth in advertising. It requires teachers like myself to treat students differently on the basis of race. And I know that by attaching my name to this, I'm risking not only my current job, and he lost it, he was fired, but my career as an educator, since most schools, both public and private, are now captive to this backward ideology. And he's right. I mean, they've been captive to it for a very long time. And this is why I salute these dads. They're taking steps to fix the problem by doing what has to be done, speaking up, removing their children, protecting their children, right? But witnessing the harmful impact all this has on children, I cannot stay silent. Thank you, Mr. Rossi. His name is Paul Rossi, who wrote the second letter. Mr. Rossi says that, quote, dependency, resentment, and moral superiority are cultivated in students who get the tag oppressed. If they're oppressed, what this all does, it cultivates in them dependency. And how do these things go together? Well, in this crazy ideology, they do. Dependency on other people, resentment toward other people, and superiority over everybody. That's what it teaches them to have. For bringing this up, Mr. Rossi was punished. For failing to, quote, serve the greater good. That's what they told him. Hey, you're not with the program. We're going to punish you. The school forced every other teacher to read a reprimand letter about Mr. Rossi to their classes, to all the students. And then they gave Rossi an ultimatum letter that said he had to undergo special training, special indoctrination of his own if he was going to sign a contract to stay on at the school. All right? And then Mr. Rossi says this. A recent faculty email chain received enthusiastic support for recommending that we start, all of us, we teachers start officially flagging students who appear, listen to this, resistant to the culture we are trying to establish. So if somebody is not going along, like Mr. Rossi wasn't, if a student wasn't, they were supposed to be flagged by all the teachers. And so when Mr. Rossi spoke up, he said, okay, we're going to flag these students for being resistant. What is resistance? How would we know if they were being resistant? And here's what he was told. Examples presented included, quote, persisting with a colorblind ideology. Okay. So if a student was going to persist in a colorblind ideology, like the one that Martin Luther King Jr. dreamed about, that we would judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, that's a colorblind ideology. They say that's bad. Now, if someone holds on to that, they have to be flagged. They have to get in trouble under this program. Next, if someone suggests that we treat everyone with respect, that's also bad, and they have to be flagged because they're resistant to this new racist ideology. Thirdly, a belief in meritocracy. That means if we believe people should be advanced or rewarded because of their merits, their character and their merits, then they have to be flagged. They have to be punished. And then the last one is just silence. Because why? Because if you're going to learn this curriculum properly, of course, you have to be woke. And a good woke convert is supposed to be vocal in his support of woke ideology. You have to speak up. You have to say you agree with it. You can't just be silent or you will be flagged and you'll get in trouble because maybe you're having second thoughts. Maybe you're thinking your own thoughts. You're not able to voice your support of this and join the mob and do the things the mob is supposed to do. So something is wrong then if you're silent, or if you still believe in meritocracy, or if you are not racist, or if you suggest we treat everyone with respect. You're failing in this new ideology, this new curriculum. So in short, Mr. Paul Rossi, he's out of his job because he challenged the new racism of his day. And this is what you can get in trouble for in the average school, speaking up against false ideology. The school is the primary place now that this repressive political correctness has been allowed to metastasize most aggressively over the last 20 years. Now, of course, you see it everywhere, in the workplace, in the military, in big corporations, because they can afford to hire these facilitators who teach it in those places too, but it's been strongest in the schools, elementary schools, high schools, and in the universities. Woke ideology now is fully mature in our culture, and it's creating fear, and that's keeping it alive. And this is why grown adults are now so fearful of challenging cancel culture in the workplace and in the media and in the military and especially at school. And this is why anyone who does find the courage to challenge it today is drawing on resources of heroism to stand up and lead others away from it, like the two fathers that I salute this Father's Day. So follow their example. Stand up and protect your children. Whatever the cost, get them out of the schools, the public and private schools, which endorse this political ideology. Thank you.